Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for being with us here today. I'm Dina Kimball, the Executive Director of the Candida Fund, but today I am really proud to wear my hat as the founding chair of redefinED Atlanta. I'm honored to kick off the event. And I'm going to stress out my redefinED team by immediately going off my planned remarks because I came across this quote this morning and I couldn't help but read it. I thought it was particularly apropos to the day and the event. See if you can recognize where this quote comes from for you English majors. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. Give you guys a second. For some of you, you may recognize that from the opening line from Orwell's dystopia 1984. And we can certainly interpret it that way. But this morning, I'm going to interpret the clock striking 13 on a 40-degree morning in Atlanta as an opportunity to see old problems with fresh eyes, new opportunities, and to remember that sometimes the impossible can become the possible. If you joined us at this event in 2019, you'll notice an updated name and audience. We used to call it an investors meeting and built this event specifically as a funders briefing. We've changed it to today's title of a stakeholders convening. Both the name and the audience of this event were updated very intentionally. Our goal was to create a shared space for all types of organizations and individuals that we work with and serve. It's also our hope that by broadening the scope of the convening, we're increasing access and accountability for you all. It represents an acknowledgement that this is how meaningful and sustainable change comes about. redefinED Atlanta is a growing collective of community members, philanthropists, and civic leaders dedicated to a vision of Atlanta where every student in every community receives a great K-12 public education. And members of that collective, you all are here with us today. We're honored and grateful that so many of you are taking the time to join us. I believe we have our APS, Atlanta Public Schools Superintendent, Dr. Lisa Herring, at least was intending to be in the Zoom room, as are some members of the Atlanta Board of Education, Loretta Balden, Ishay Collins, and Michelle Olympiadis. If they're not here yet, they should be joining us shortly. Thank you all so much for coming. And I believe we were also planning on being joined by our famous 60 Minutes celebrity, also known as Dr. Grant Rivera, who is the superintendent of Marietta City Schools. If you haven't seen his recent interview on 60 Minutes, I highly recommend it. In 2019, if you all joined us for that event, you'll recall a lot of talk about just beginning our community-based work. And while that work is still young, it's no longer in its infancy. And today we're really going to use this opportunity to dive into the community-based innovations and investments that you all have helped ignite through your work with us. Before I do that, I want to introduce you to the group of leaders who keep redefinED moving forward. They're all here in the Zoom room this morning. redefinED turns 5 years old this year, and this small but feisty team have been able to have an outsized impact on our improvement of public education in Atlanta. We're incredibly proud of their work. In particular, I want to acknowledge Ada Pittman Delancey and B. Purdue as two members of the staff who were not on our team in 2019 when we last held this event. In fact, technically B is not even yet on our staff. I think she's starting in a few weeks, and we want to really acknowledge Ada's fine work over the last year that she's been with us and the fine work we know to come from B. So that's our team. We also have an incredible board of directors whose expertise and lived experience, their roots in the community, add up to an inspiring commitment to creating more widespread educational opportunity for children in our city. Today, it is my particular privilege to announce that my dear friend and colleague, Ayanna Gabriel, has recently accepted the role of chair-elect this year and is preparing to take her seat at the head of the board of directors when I step down from that position at the end of this year. Let's give it up for Ayanna. I know she probably needs no introduction, but I'm going to give you a little one anyway, Ayana. Ayana Gabriel is Atlanta. She serves as the Senior Program Officer overseeing the Pathways to Success programs at the Arthur M. Blank Family Foundation. And in this role, she leads the foundation's grant making around education initiatives that seek to provide all children in Atlanta with a quality education. Ayana also oversees the foundation's work around social justice. After beginning her career as a chemical engineer, Ayana transitioned to the classroom with Atlanta Public Schools as a science teacher at Bunch Middle School and chemistry and physics teacher at South Atlanta High School. Ayana graduated from Spelman College and Georgia Tech with dual bachelor's degrees in chemistry and engineering. She serves on the board of the Atlanta Beltline and is an active leader in her local Westview Neighborhood Association. And I can see from the crazy numbers of chats coming through, you all are as thrilled as I am that Ayana is taking on this role. Ayana really represents a new era of our work and the promise of what is possible when community and education leaders come together to envision and work hard. We're so excited for the next chapter of our work and for Ayana's leadership. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ayana Gabriel, the new chair-elect of redefinED. Take it away, Ayana.
I'm really flattered and blushing. Thank you, everyone, seriously. And thank you, Dina. I would not be here today, and redefinED would not be here today if it wasn't for Dina's stalwart support. So I want to give the thanks back to you, Dina, for your leadership, for what you've done for the city, our schools, and the kids, especially coming out of the cheating scandal, so that we emerge stronger than ever. I'm also grateful to all of you. Many of you I've gotten to know over the years through my involvement with redefinED. I'm really, truly honored, seriously honored to be chair-elect, and I'm really excited about what this means for Atlanta and Atlanta's kids. So let's talk a little bit about what we hope to happen today. We want today to feel like the future of our movement. We hope that this is a personable and engaging opportunity to listen and connect, not just with us at redefinED, but also with everyone here, your fellow Atlantans and guests. I'm also reminded again, unfortunately, this week, this moment in history, both here in Georgia and nationally. And I want to call out the role of racial equity and economic privilege in our work and discussions. And I'm hoping we have a chance to talk about that today. Any moments of discomfort, tension, or conflict that may arise today give us the opportunity to be brave and acknowledge the space for growth and expansion. We have certainly experienced this as a team and board at times during our organizational life cycle, as we took on conversations about our role in driving racial equity and addressing the economic privilege that's in the background of all of the problems we're trying to solve. And so we want you to know that we expect and welcome those moments of challenge and growth. So I'm going to start with a couple of norms so we can get into deep conversation. First, number one, stay engaged and join us in video as appropriate. I know there's a lot going on, things in the background. We're all now used to this Zoom life, but if you can, please stay on video so we can see you. But stay muted unless you're speaking to the entire room. And of course, we want to hear from you. I am tracking 42 comments already in the chat. Keep on chatting. So let us know what you're thinking. Number two, speak your truth. This means being open about your thoughts and feelings and not just saying what you think others want to hear. And last, accept and expect non-closure. We're going to dig into a lot of great topics here, but we also know we're dealing with very huge problems and opportunities. And so we're not going to address all of them today, but we want to commit to continuing this conversation. And so after today's event, we're going to follow up to address questions or concerns you have. And we want you to make sure that you feel heard and appreciated for what you bring to the convening. And just a note to everyone, in case you haven't noticed, we are recording. So we have a great morning planned. In addition to video updates and presentations from redefinED and partners, you'll also have the chance to participate in one of 6 discussion groups led by community and education leaders from Atlanta and beyond. So discussion groups are in the latter part of the program after we share out on the state and future of the organization and the Atlanta K-12 public education system. So you'll get a chance to choose those discussion groups after the beginning presentation. So let's figure out who's in the room. We're going to start with a few quick questions. All right, let's start with our first question, which you can see. What's your connection to redefinED in Atlanta? You only can choose one. Next up, did you attend Atlanta Public Schools Or do you have a child who has attended school in the district? So I want to pause and acknowledge that while this is a stakeholder group and everyone is here for kids, I want to acknowledge what it means that the majority of us in this room did not attend Atlanta Public Schools, nor currently have had a child currently or in the past who attended APS. Something to think about in the discussion groups. And last one, this is going to be a word cloud. With an eye on our city's next 5 years, you can respond as many times as you want. What's your hope for Atlanta students who are currently experiencing the most inequities? I just saw a comment about grandchildren. That's a good point. Opportunity and justice are the ones that I'm pulling out. Liberation, hope, access. All of these things makes me very excited for what we can do together for Atlanta's kids. Now, one last quick note from me. We'll also like to collect questions throughout today's event, beginning soon, and then address them toward the end of the program. We're going to use Slido for this also. So please, if you can, keep your phone or your browser out. You can enter questions at any time. You're going to look for a little green ask circle to get started, and you also can vote on them. So upvote questions you like and want to be featured in the Q&A by using the thumbs up button. And we'll capture all of your questions here so we can share answers and resources. Now that we have a sense of who's here and why we're here, I want to introduce the founding, fearless, and fantastic Executive Director of redefinED Atlanta, Ed Chang.
Thanks, Diana. That's a lot of adjectives. Hopefully I can live up to them. I'm so grateful that you've agreed to serve as chair-elect, and I'm looking forward to working with you in this new role. I also really want to acknowledge Dina as she transitions out of the chair role at the end of the year. For those of you who know, Dina helped to found this organization, and she's since served as my friend and mentor for the last 5 years. I'm certainly a better leader, and redefinED is definitely a better organization because of her. So thank you so much, Dina. I'd like to start by grounding my remarks in the moment that we're in as a city. Consider what we as a community have been through since our last convening in 2019. The killing of Ahmaud Arbery, the killing of Rayshard Brooks, the killing of Sequoia Turner, one of our own KIPP and APS scholars in our own backyard, the protests downtown that followed the killing of George Floyd, the 2020 presidential election and US Senate elections, a global pandemic, and recently, the murder of 8 people in our own community, including 6 Asian Americans. And in just the past year alone, we've seen incredible shifts and disruptions in education. We've seen a superintendent change. We've seen the response of running a school in a pandemic. Schools closing and shifting to virtual learning within a matter of weeks. Systems adapting to deal with job loss, food and digital insecurity, housing loss. A transition to hybrid and face-to-face learning while teachers and school leaders navigate accessing PPE and vaccines. We've seen school leaders and district officials grapple with how to just assess if children are learning. And on top of that, we're preparing for a shift where all 9 school board seats are up for election in November. These events, many of them traumatic, most of them large, have underscored why redefinED exists and why redefinED must continue to grow. We exist to be a through line amidst what we know to be the constant change of systems. We're able to push for sustainability and to lay the infrastructure that can support local leaders who are pushing for something better for our schools. But we're also deeply aware that we must evolve and we must grow. Because of these events of the last 2 years, the lessons we've learned over the last 5 years, and the historical context in which all of these events are grounded in. We have to be mindful of the intersectionality of all other issues related to the social determinants of health, while still upholding public schools and educational equity as our North Star. And that work will require being bolder and broader. So, as you may recall, redefinED started with an emphasis on grant making. And we came to be seen as an intermediary organization. We saw our role as raising and aligning funding, investing strategically, and as building coherence to support a citywide transformation. And as you see in the last 5 years, we've invested quite a bit of capital, almost $12 million into the Atlanta system. What I hope you come away from today is an awareness of how we're deepening our commitments and an understanding of why. Over the last 5 years, we've strengthened our beliefs and knowledge that grant making alone is insufficient and an incomplete match for the moment that we're in. We want to be clearer and bolder. Our North Star will always be focused on ensuring that there are more students in great schools. But as we mentioned in our convening last year, we know that those who are impacted the most need to have the most agency and the most say in where their children attend school and the quality of those schools. And so as a result, we're doubling down on our commitment to community. We're viewing schools in their entirety as part of a larger community, and we're committed to supporting that larger community, both in our talent work and our ecosystem development work. And my colleagues will be talking about that in just a minute. And so I'd like to hand this over to Mary Kate to talk a little bit more about our lessons learned.
Thanks, Ed. So we want to take just a few minutes to revisit 3 lessons that we shared with our audience back in the 2019 investors meeting. And these lessons have become guiding principles of sorts that we are using for our work. We circle back to them often, and we want to circle back to them with you today by highlighting some of the grantees and partners who really live out these guiding principles and show us what work can look like in the community and on the ground. So that first lesson that we shared is that the most extreme and pressing inequities deserve the most bold and urgent actions. And of course, this plays out in many ways. An important one is how and why we invest in schools. And so while you heard Ed reference that we are pushing for broader and more systemic change for families, we also have to think about how to provide high quality, culturally relevant, and equitable solutions for families now. And so to highlight this point, we'd like to introduce a video featuring Elena Chipman Leaks, who founded and launched Atlanta Unbound Academy in the midst of the pandemic, and whose school serves students and families who are facing the very inequities we speak of.
Launching a school is extremely exciting and overwhelmingly stressful. There are lots of things that came up as surprises that I could not have ever even planned for. The biggest lesson I learned is how important funding and budgeting is. It literally dictates every decision you make, from the type of facility to the type of vendors you use, all of those challenges and lessons learned, which I am extremely thankful to different funders that we had, because we would not be able to do things like hire an architect, hire an engineer, which were things that we had to do in order to get formal approval to open up a school. Atlanta Unbound Academy will empower students who achieve intellectually, interpret the world critically, and dream beyond measure. We will serve as a beacon of academic promise and create a community of students who are the seeds of their ancestors' wildest dreams. When I see our 93 kids right now, and I look at their math and ELA growth just in this short period of time, not only was it worth it, but it was necessary. It doesn't matter how hard something is, when you're doing it for the right reason, it's absolutely worth it.
The second lesson that we've learned is that collaboration with community is fundamental. It's necessary and it's imperative. 5 years ago, there was limited infrastructure for parent and community engagement around public schools. Today, we're in a place where redefinED can set up a pandemic relief fund and completely turn it over to 2 parent-led community groups who can best identify and act on the most extreme needs and pressing inequities amongst their communities. We'd like to introduce another short video featuring the leaders of those 2 organizations, Kimberly Dukes of Atlanta Thrive and Ricardo Miguel Martinez of the Latino Association for Parents of Public Schools.
The FUBU ATL Fund was a collaboration between LAPS and Atlanta Thrive. That was a $100,000 fund that redefinED was able to provide to us. And what we did is we split that right down the middle. And we said $50,000 was going to go to Atlanta Thrive for Black families, and $50,000 was going to go to LAPS to brown families. The reason that made a lot of sense for us is because we already do a lot of work with Thrive. We've been doing a lot of work in the community around equity in our respective communities. And when you think about who suffers the most inequities in any urban city in the country, it's always going to be Black and brown people.
While we're thinking about how we're going to educate kids and is it safe for them to engage with other people, or will they be reading on grade level, we had parents that lost jobs, so they needed food. They needed to pay their rent. They needed to pay the light bill. They needed to pay the babysitter just so that they can go to work during COVID. So the FUBU ATL Fund was very impactful. Being a Black leader of an organization and also being directly connected to the community and being able to see parents fix a small issue that will affect the entire household in that moment gave us a chance to build relationships and actually get the stories and identify how we can help parents better educate themselves on ways to engage at the school.
I'm just excited that we didn't have to create this in the middle of a pandemic. We were prepared, and now we have to prepare for how we're going to move forward now, knowing that all these inequities always existed, but now they've been exposed.
The third lesson is about marrying influence and investment. Our grant making is only one facet of what we do. We will not be able to fund our way out of persistent inequities. Much of our work has to be done through influencing policy and building systems and structures that can last over time, especially at the community level. We've been proud to be a part of the group of foundations who helped launch the Chief Equity and Social Justice Officer role at Atlanta Public Schools. Our last video features our partners, Tanae Traylor of the Candida Fund and Ruby Sullivan of the Annie E. Casey Foundation, as they share more about the power of philanthropic partnership and investing in equity.
While equity and race equity is everyone's work in the school district, we really needed there to be a person who was accountable for leading that work. So that led us down the path of partnering with the school district. Dr. Herring, as she was coming in, wanted to engage in this work of having an equity officer, equity and social justice officer. So it was just a matter of the stars aligning for us, honestly.
We were not just strategic in our ultimate outcome of getting this position in this office launched, but really in our funding approach. And that was something that I've always appreciated, the give-get, the push-pull that we have in these partnerships. And Ruby was open to that, and so was APS. They were actually very appreciative that we could help lay this model and really hopefully provide a gateway, a pathway for other funders to join in and learn.
What I expect from our other funders is to eventually be able to join us in partnering with the school district, to get out of their way, to not impose work that they might think is going to have one outcome when folks doing the work know something different, to really understand both the intended and unintended consequences of programs that may or may not be working, but could in fact be causing harm, if you will.
I want schools to be able to innovate as the standard. We're having to think about school differently. We can no longer just go in and focus on instruction. We have to think about the whole child. And so we need the school to feel like they can partner with the housing organizations or with health organizations, with arts and culture organizations to provide a rich environment for these young people. So these are the outcomes that I'm hoping that the Chief Equity and Justice Officer, which I don't want to downplay the social justice part of this position, can think about. It's a big role to think about how does a school become a partner in the midst of so many other things. And I see that over the next 5 to 10 years.
Now that you've gotten a taste of where we've been, I'd like to take a few minutes and provide a bit more context about where redefinED plans to go in the next 5 years and how we decided on this course of action. First, we spent late 2019 and early 2020 invested in our REI journey, race, equity, and inclusion, with the support of Frontline Solutions, a Black-owned consulting firm that serves the philanthropic and nonprofit sectors. Through that work, we started to inspect our own organization's equity footprints. And as you see, the equity footprint model explores 7 different domains relevant to foundations and organizations like ours. These domains, as you can read, include grant making, investments, leadership and governance, evaluation and learning, communications, operations, and organizational culture. With the help of external stakeholder interviews and lots of work by our board and staff, we identified areas of promise and growth in most of these. And then the team at Frontline Solutions developed recommendations for us in each area. That work was really pivotal in helping us prioritize and determine the first 3 domains of work that we would take on as a board and staff for our REI journey: leadership and governance, grant making, and operations. Recommendations in these areas included things like hiring and operational systems, blind reviews, inspecting who our vendors are, et cetera. From a grant making lens, it includes removing barriers to access, giving largely unrestricted funding, exploring concepts like participatory grant making. And in governance, we want to ensure that not only do we have a diverse board and representation, but that we also have parents of students within the communities that we serve who sit on our board in the highest positions of power within our organization. When we began that work, we understood that this equity assessment and the resulting recommendations would play a significant role in how we approached our larger multi-year strategic plan. So in April 2020, when we began our strategic planning process, our first order of business was using the equity footprint to frame our revised mission, strategy, and goals for the 21 through 25 school strategic plan. So as you can see, our vision has remained largely the same, but our mission is refreshed to reflect the reality of the work that we do, add emphasis on our commitment to working with community and how engagement, advocacy, and grant making ultimately combine to drive systemic change. And so I'd like to look at our mission in the context of our organizing framework. I want to say a few words about the 3 program areas that we mentioned in our mission, as they are the 3 key areas of our focus. And so as we go on to the organizing framework, to begin with, we start with our vision, mission, principles, and our goal, our North Star again, to increase the number of students in Atlanta who attend great schools. The principles that inform all of our work are grounded in race, equity, and inclusion. And as we get into our programmatic work, on the first point, over the last several years, redefinED Atlanta has come to recognize the centrality of community engagement in our ability to make continued and sustained progress on education. And so looking at that first piece, engaging community, that students, families, grassroots, and grasstops leaders, it all involves building authentic and long-lasting relationships and coalitions to support community identified needs, including education, housing, transportation, et cetera. On the second point, without deep and sustained community-centered advocacy work, our families, community, and stakeholders will not be able to fight for their own needs and increase the number of their children attending great schools. There's a host of policy and practice barriers that prevent transformation, and so building effective advocacy strategies and infrastructure is critical to redefineED Atlanta's ability to serve students and families in Atlanta. And on the third point, this is where most of people will recognize our work. redefinED Atlanta has always funded schools, talent, and community in an effort to build out and support the local education system in Atlanta. And so funding critical work, schools and systems, community and policy, and talent development, that will continue to be an important part of redefinED Atlanta's activities over the next 5 years, particularly as our advocacy and engage efforts unlock opportunities to increase the number of students who can attend those great schools. And finally, internally, the operations side is just as critical for us. These functions are critical for our organization's continued existence and its ability to execute its key areas of focus. Just as race, inequity, and exclusion are central to the current failings of public systems around our country, a deep commitment to race, equity, and inclusion are central to our ability to have impact. They'll guide all aspects of the internal and external work that we do and should act as a litmus test for every single action and activity. And we're going to touch on this again with the discussion groups. And so for those of you who have been with us for a while, you'll notice that none of these focus areas are really new, but they should be better organized to emphasize our values and priorities during this next stage of our organizational development. And as a partner, I hope that you can see and easily identify where your own priorities and goals can align. So Ada, for those of you who have not met her before, is our Vice President of Impact and External Relations. She'll now show you how those lessons learned and revised mission came together to inform our new community strategy theory of change.
Thank you so much, Ed. Before I begin, I want to be intentional about our efforts and expressing that in the beginning of the event, we intended to express the services that we provided to make the event more accessible. So I want to just pause for a moment to ensure that if there are any attendees that have joined us that would like to hear the program in Spanish or desire to read the captions, you should see that information on the screen. But we are providing simultaneous interpretation in American Sign Language and in Spanish. So at the bottom of your screen, there is a link for interpretation services. It looks like a little world. If you click on that and you prefer to hear the program in Spanish, you can go to that link. So I'll pause and get back to our regularly scheduled programs. So Ed expressed that I joined the team last year, and ultimately, as we are moving forward with our community strategy, the plan, and our efforts to address the most extreme and pressing inequities, we recognize that we can't take a top-down thinking approach, even if our intentions are the best. As some of you have heard us mention before, paternalistic philanthropy has limited the rate at which we see change happen in communities. Listening to the people in the neighborhoods that make up the community revealed the greatest opportunity to drive sustainable change over time. Here in the city of Atlanta, we have an abundance of resources and the opportunity to be deliberate about how we make sure every child attending public schools in this city attends a great public school, and that they only do well, but that they thrive beyond the statistics that have been assigned to them by their constructed zip codes. Our team at redefinED Atlanta, we are anchoring our efforts in education, and we work to support what we believe are the factors that will create a city where every child attending a public school attends a great public school. Our community theory of change is anchored in the belief that our broad group of stakeholders and champions amplifying the stories and unique needs of our communities can grow the number of informed and active education advocates that can work together in intersectional coalitions to realize racial justice for the children of Atlanta. So if you look at this model on the screen, you'll see that that circle is the work that we are supporting, and that is led in partnership with community. What we've seen happen in districts across the US is that breakdowns in the process of listening and being responsive to the families, teachers, and school leaders in the district lend to leadership moving on or being ushered out. Districts and leaders need the community support to do the work of creating and sustaining the policies and actions that drive a fair and just school system. This is why engaging and building relationships with the people that live and serve in the neighborhoods that make up the Atlanta community will serve as the foundation of how we partner to do this work. In our discussion groups today, we'll feature two of the parent-led organizations that you just saw in the video, whose work across the district has helped to inform our advocacy. In addition, the middle of the circle, where you see an active civic community, strong leaders and electeds, all working together to advance equity and racial justice in education, is work that redefinED has to do in intersectional coalitions. I'd like to take a moment and acknowledge Anthony Wilson, with the Executive Director of Equity in Education, which is a new C4 organization. They are dedicated to accelerating just and fair schools for Black and Brown children in Atlanta by ensuring every child has a champion for equity representing them on the school board. We look forward to working in partnership with them and stakeholders like many of you within our community to ensure that we are advancing racially just and equitable policies for our students to thrive. Now that we've shared our path forward, we get the chance to break out into discussion groups because we've talked at you a whole lot. You'll have the opportunity to hear from some of our partners, share your impressions and our collective work, and ask questions. The information again regarding our interpretation services, I want to note that for participants that are using the services of the interpreters, the simultaneous interpretation will not be provided during the breakout sessions. However, you will have access to the closed captions in English, and also you will have access to an external link that gives you the ability to convert those captions into Spanish. As soon as you go into the breakout rooms, that will be in the public chat. So you can just click that link and it'll take you to a service where you can see the conversation in your preferred language. When we come back into the main room for the closing remarks, you will be able to use the services of the simultaneous interpretation again by just clicking that interpretation button at the bottom of the screen. So as it relates to the discussion groups, I want to make sure that I acknowledge all of them. We have 6. You will have the opportunity to select the group that you prefer to learn more about. The What is a Great School Anyway is a conversation and a preview of the school data tool, which features 2 parents from the Atlanta Public School District, as well as one of our staff members and board members. Advancing Community Power and Influence will include the 2 parent-led advocacy organizations that we featured in the video, and I'll be joining them for that discussion. The third breakout group is the exploration of reimagining schools across the US, and that will feature our executive director along with other organizations doing this work across the district. The fourth breakout group, our equity footprint and REI journey, which will feature a number of our board members as well as our staff member that really spearheaded integrating this into all of our work. The fifth discussion group is the talent talk, impact of the partnership between Atlanta Public Schools and Relay GSC, Graduate School of Education. And that will feature our district partners as well as one of our board members. And finally, and certainly not least, running a school in a pandemic, reflections on flexibility and autonomy, which will also feature 2 leaders of schools in addition to one of our board members.
It's great to see everyone. I wanted to go to all the groups. Will there be videos that we could watch possibly of the breakout groups that we weren't able to participate in? That would be awesome.
So that's a great question. We did not record the breakout sessions because we wanted to allow folks space to ask and discuss really meaty things. But we do have notes, and if your group, if groups shared slides, like that's the kind of stuff that we'll share out with everyone post-event, so you can at least track what kinds of conversations were happening. Absolutely.
We are going to open the virtual floor to questions now. Your name will show up. Rachel Sprecker's done a great example of this. You can vote up certain questions. Ayanna and I are going to moderate by taking questions out loud, directing it to the appropriate person to answer. Probably not going to get to all these. We'll try to get to as many as we can. Site will capture questions. We're going to answer any questions that we don't get to today. During the live Q&A, we will catch you on the back end. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ayanna.
So first question I'm going to take based on the number of votes is from Elise. Thank you, Elise. How are you defining Atlanta going forward? Still a focus on APS. And I'm going to kick that to Ed.
All right, thank you so much. So going forward, we are considering the thought of expansions. And so as we know, as our city is changing pretty rapidly, right? Like I think when we did our speaker series over the last couple of years, it was titled A City Changing, right? And so we know that our city is getting gentrified, families and students are getting displaced. And so over time, we are considering expansion out to some greater metro Atlanta area districts potentially. But right now, within the next year or two, we still are doubling down on really our community work here within the APS, listening and learning and trying to deepen our impact here, we have to be able to have proof points that we can bring to other districts later on.
All right, thanks. I'm going to go ahead and take the next question from Donnie Trent. How do we build the capacity of the district and city leadership to move beyond community engagement towards co-creation with communities? So Ada, that's all you.
Yeah, I think some of the ways that we're seeing the district engage at this point with the constraints of COVID, I think the first place to start is listening. I think there are opportunities to work throughout clusters to create agreements, community agreements, and then identify ways that they are not being served and ways that they are being served. And that two-way conversation and check-in are the things that drive us forward. The ideas that our superintendent is bringing forward currently in the conversations of reimagining the district, I believe is leading us to this place where we are and will be discussing co-creation. So I believe as far as building the capacity, the opportunities that we have at redefinED are to also listen and partner with other members of the philanthropy community to hear the needs and then support them. I believe the video earlier, Ruby expressed, how do we get out of the district's way so that they can hear the communities, respond to the communities, and then identify as a group, philanthropy group and relationships that we maintain, how we work with them to supply the support in the way of resources, time, energy. So that's my perspective on that. Ed, is there anything else you'd like to add?
I mean, I guess I'll say that the growth of organizations like Atlanta Thrive, of LAPS, and folks in the community, folks are making their voices known and their needs known, and quite often, sometimes it's difficult for an entire district to really figure out what's the voice, what are the needs, and so here are organizations that are actually designed to help work in partnership with as well with the district, and so I think. As they continue to establish themselves, they have more seats at the table. And I think it starts with that, like, what are the tables that are actually being set? And are you inviting people in to have seats at those tables, or are you actually going to somebody else's table?
As a board member, I'll just say one of the things concretely we're excited about is we are investing in a community co-creation, co-design school that is just getting going now. And I hope we'll be able to do more of that in the future. I think there's a great question from Caroline about policy changes you expect to advocate for over the next few years. I'm going to hand that to Ed, back to Ed, I think.
Sounds good. Yeah, so I think most of the policy changes that we would love to advocate for center around concepts like accountability, center around things like autonomy, center around things like equity. And so some of that work is going on right now. So if not sure if folks are aware on this call, the school board right now is contemplating a series of what they would call goals and guardrails, where they're actually setting goals and targets for the district in terms of their academic growth, where they're setting guardrails, theoretically should be setting guardrails around things like how long is too long to allow a school to underperform, and what are the series of interventions that you might actually put in place to ensure that those schools get the supports that they need. And so those are the types of policy changes that we would like to see, is accountability and real action and urgency around improving schools.
Great. I think Rachel Sprecker's question is a really good one. So strengths that you see within the APS schools. I could probably ask anybody that question on the team. I'm sure they'd all have a long answer, but maybe I'll turn that one over to Gira, who hasn't had a chance to weigh in yet.
Sure. So I would say, from my lens, it feels like there are a lot of really exciting things that are going on at APS. I think some of the current work around really trying to build equity into operations at the school is really exciting. I think that there's also some great work happening with increased community collaboration, which I know Donnie mentioned earlier. And I can speak personally, like I do a lot of our data work, and in building our own school data tool, one of the things that I've been seeing is APS, we look at how schools do relative to poverty and mobility, and APS schools do a lot better than most schools in Georgia when you account for some of these other things that historically lower achievement. And so that's really exciting. So that says there's something to learn there.
So we have 3 wonderful questions, but we only have time for one more. And so I'm actually going to take the question, well, we just voted it up, for Brittany, thank you, who are thinking about the most little ones. And so how can we increase engagement and alignment with the early learning sector in Atlanta so children have a strong start? I think, Ed, I'm going to kick that to you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Brittany, I mean, it sounds a little contrite, but I mean, part of it would be kicking it back to you and listening and learning from those who are best in class at the work, right? So, I mean, there are organizations like yours and folks who are doing incredible work. And, you know, the thing that I would say is that redefinED, I think Dina mentioned it on the front end, we see ourselves as a growing collective of stakeholders and a tapestry of organizations that are all fighting for equity and racial justice. And so, as such, we don't ever want to claim to be the experts in each space, right? And so as we think about Achieve Atlanta in the post-secondary, as we think about you all with early education, as we think about us centered in K through 12, part of that is we would hope that we could partner with you and things like that and be able to draw a larger tent and to be able to say, look, like if this is the challenge and the issue, here are all the other people in the tent. And here's how these coalitions start. This is how the co-creation, this is how the co-problem solving works, so that our connections are your connections are our connections, and your work is our work, and vice versa. So that way we're all actually drinking from the same well and moving humanity forward.
Awesome. Thank you, Ed. Okay. There's so many questions we did not get to. We will follow up on some of them. I want to thank you guys for your thoughtful questions and your engagement in the small groups and throughout the morning. With that, I am going to turn it back over to Ed, I think.
To Mary Kate.
Mary Kate, sorry.
That's okay. I'm off video because my internet's shaky and I'm the one sharing the screen. So you get to just hear my voice while I talk to you about how excited we are to continue this forward momentum. Today's event is winding down. We have just a few moments left, but hopefully it's clear to you that redefinED Atlanta is just gearing up, and we want to continue to really push forward in this work to systemically improve Atlanta public schools and the system for all of our students and families. So we ask that you continue to engage, and you can do so in a number of ways. First, you can visit the link that Ada is going to drop into the Zoom chat window now to sign up for our advocacy alerts, coalition and convening updates, and also for event notifications. We'll also share that out in the post-event materials that you'll receive. Second, of course, you can donate. Your contribution to redefinED Atlanta supports the entire portfolio of work that we do in supporting Atlanta as it transforms into a city where every student and every community receives a great K-12 public education. And third, we encourage you to participate, to learn more, engage with, and directly support the organizations that you've heard from today.
And last but not least, you can help us grow our board in keeping with our commitment of being guided by the people most directly impacted by the inequities we're working to address. We're seeking parents and caregivers of APS students. Interested applicants will participate in a board development program, and ultimately will add 2 seats to our governing board of directors. We ask that you help us spread the word. The application opens on Monday, and we'll be recruiting throughout the rest of the school year. So I'll drop that link in the chat. Well, thank you, Mary Kate. Drop the link in the chat, and we'll include it in our follow-up materials as well. And I'll kick it back to Ed so we can wrap this up.
So thank you so much. I'm going to try to get us out right on time. So we do hope that you've enjoyed your time with us and your fellow community today. And we hope that you are walking away with more clarity on who we are, what we do, and the direction that we're headed in Atlanta. I will say that in this time of uncertainty and challenge brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic and racial justice reckoning, We've just all been forced to upend our lives as we know them. And in our field of education, we have been forced to reshape schools and all the systems that support them. And I'm tired. Like, I have to be really honest, I'm really tired, and the world is tired. And in that exhaustion, it's so easy to wish for things to return to normal and to will it to return back to normal as soon as possible. But I'll say to that, across our city, state, and country, there is a shared understanding developing that the worst thing that can come out of this experience is that we go back to what was before and we go back to normal. And we can't go back to the way that it was, because honestly, the way that it was never really worked for Black and brown kids in the first place. And so this is our opportunity to dream bigger, to reimagine, to redesign, and yes, to redefine what's possible in education. It's going to take all of us to make it happen. And I really do hope you join us for the journey. And so that's all we have for you today. I wish we could say April Fools, but this has really been real. Please take a moment to respond to the survey that's in the chat window. And we'll also send a follow-up email with resources and the survey and more. And just thank you again. Have a great rest of your week and weekend. And I am going to give you 2 minutes of your life back.